So, my name's Fred Williams. I have a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering, and I am also the host of Real Science Radio. So for those of you who were here last year, Bob Inyart started Real Science Radio about 26 years ago, and I joined him about 16 years ago. And Bob, unfortunately for us, went to be with the Lord. Not unfortunate for him, as he's in paradise now, and I'm sure he's asking Sir Isaac Newton lots of questions, along with the Apostle Paul and so many others. So, Real Science Radio, our purpose really is to provide science from a biblical point of view. We look at secular current science studies, and we try to provide a way for people to have a resource to hear the truth presented in a different way, because we all have the same evidence. It's how you interpret that evidence. And so pictured there is myself and Doug McBurney. He joined the Real Science Radio team about 3 months ago as a co-host. He has years of experience in radio, and he's been fantastic. So, you know, I had my son on the radio at one point. I was interviewing about his experience in college and how, you know, he was we brought him up through a Christian school. But when he went to college, everybody there believes in evolution in millions of years, and he was really surprised by that, despite the fact that we kind of warned him that that's the way it is. So we're here to provide another tool in the tool belt for you and for ex-JWs, because a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, the atheists are out there with open arms, as Perry has told me, and they just latch on to them, and they seem to have a plan and we don't. So I hope that what you get out of this is another tool in the toolbox to be able to reach them. We believe our website is a really good resource. You can go to rsar.org and find anything you want. You can go to rsar.org/DNA if you want to find out about DNA. Go to rsar.org/dinosaurs, and you'll find out that dinosaur bones aren't millions of years old. They can't be scientifically. They're now discovering not only soft tissue, but they're also discovering DNA. And if you watch those shows on TV, CBI, whatever they're called, yeah, those crime shows, DNA doesn't last very long. It's a very fragile molecule, and yet you're finding it in dinosaur bones that are supposed to be millions of years old. So we cover that on the show. We talk about it. We have all that stuff on our website. And, you know, going back to my son, when he was on the radio, I said, hey, Ryan, tell us how people can listen to RSR. And I'm like, you know, first of all, they can go to AM 670 in Denver. It's a 50,000 watt blowtorch for creation science, and we reach the adjacent states. But I said, there's other ways, right? Like a podcast, you know that thing where you have to get a device to listen to it? And Ryan's like, on air. You know, I think my dad's the only podcast host who doesn't know what a podcast is. So as it turns out, you can go listen on a podcast in places like Spotify, Apple Music, and places like that. You can find Real Science Radio. You can go to rsar.org and just listen to it there, listen to it online if you can't listen Friday at 3 p.m. in the Denver time zone. Okay, one of the resources we have plenty of them, and it helps us stay on the air. This is one of my favorites. It's Evidence Against the Big Bang. Bob Inyart put this video together some time ago. It's very well produced. It's fantastic. So if you go to rsr.org and want to help us, that's one resource I'd recommend among many. So we're going to talk today about what information is, and then we'll get into a little bit more details and why this becomes a powerful argument for the God of the universe, the God who is the ultimate information giver. So what is information? If you look at the picture on the left on the top, we know that wasn't something that wind and erosion carved out, Mount Rushmore. You know that that's design. If you're flying over and you see SOS, that's information. We know that's a cry for help. The bottom three are not information. They may seem like it. You know, a snowflake is it's symmetrically produced, and it's not really conveys information. Smoke from a smokestack, maybe it conveys that building is producing something. The last one looks like a face on Mars, and we're going to talk about that one a little bit more, because, you know, atheists and people who believe in aliens love that image. So how does Webster's define information? It's the communication or reception of knowledge or intelligence. Or Wikipedia, this is a Shannon information. Information is the resolution of uncertainty. We like those definitions as engineers. Those work for us, and we can go off of those. There's a William Dembski, real brilliant scientist. He came up with complex specified information. So we're going to just go through a few brief slides just to kind of tell you what information is, and then we'll dive in further. So if you consider Scrabble, you just dump the Scrabble tiles out on the table. You may be able to see words in there. So that would be what's called specified, but it's not complex. So it's not really information. It's just, the random way that the tiles fell on the table. But if you saw something like this, tiles aren't going to land upright. Maybe one or two. But here you see the word love. Someone intentionally did that. So we know that this is both complex and specified. That's clearly information. A guy named Werner Gitt, he was the director of information technology at one of Germany's most prestigious universities. He came up with these 5 levels of information. First, there was statistics, so that would be like characters, symbols. For example, the English alphabet. You've got A through Z, small a through small z. Those are symbols, and you got syntax of how you can put those letters together, say to form words, and then you've got semantics. What do the words mean? And then he had higher levels of information that does the information require an action and a purpose. And he came up with a law that is true. To me, it should be a scientific law. Universal information can only be produced by an intelligent sender. Even atheists recognize this, but they won't always say it. And we'll give you an example. So Shannon is who most people appeal to who are secular evolutionists or people who are not real familiar with creation, or if you're just an engineer, Shannon information is what we appeal to. There are some creationists who don't think it's the right type of information, but I disagree with them on that. I think you can use Shannon information, the same information that the world uses, to defend creation. So Shannon information, 3 levels. You got the syntax, semantics, and purpose. That's all in his 1949 book. He wrote a paper a year before that deals with how do you get data efficiently through a channel. Not going to cover that. I was going to, and I realized it's about 5 minutes to lose in the audience, so we'll skip that part. So information is measured as the reduction of uncertainty. So let's look at some examples. I'm a Broncos season ticket holder. So one of the things they do at Denver Bronco games is occasionally they'll have these images like this, and then you got to guess who the player is as they start removing tiles. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'll remove a few. Now, as you see, as more and more tiles are being removed, we're reducing the uncertainty of who this player is. Now, I'll give you a clue. He's a Denver Bronco who is a very good player. So now that we're this far, if you know the Broncos, there's 3 or 4 players that could be. It could be Emmanuel Sanders, because he's got a 0. It could be Terrell Davis. It could be Rod Smith. You don't really know, but you're getting more certain. You've narrowed down the number of players this could be. So as you remove a few more tiles, now who do you think it might be? And I realize you're in San Antonio. You improperly root for the Cowboys or the Texans. Because, I live in Colorado. I got to use a Bronco example. Well, as we remove more tiles, all of a sudden the crowd's shouting, Terrell Davis, and that's who it is. So here's another example. A lot of people like the game Wheel of Fortune. My parents love that show. I'm guaranteed to have to watch it when I go visit them. It's the same concept. As you guess letters, you're reducing uncertainty. You're gaining information. I like this one. I'm going to play a brief clip, and I hope the audio works. But this is these are the letters they have, and now they have to try to guess what the phrase is. Anybody here want to take a wild guess what it is? The person in the middle ends up getting it, but 2 of them don't. Yes?
Is it a group of ball bashers?
That's almost as funny as the guy what he's going to say. So yes.
A group of field pushers.
It's people.
That's okay. We're going to listen now. See if this works. Oops.
It's a P. People, your time starts now.
Can you hear it?
A group of pill pushers?
So that's not it.
Good night, everyone. Thank you. This is Wheel of Fortune, y'all. A group of real witches.
group of well-wishers.
Yeah, that's it.
There we go.
Better.
Okay, so the person in the middle figured that one out. So anyways, here's examples of information. I mentioned the SOS on a beach before. The Bible is information. A computer program, obviously, blueprints for a building, stick figures. You know, you can convey information there, maybe male or female. And again, Mount Rushmore, all examples of information. So now we're going to kind of have a test based on, now that you know kind of what information is, hopefully, I'm going to do a quick test. So that diagram at the top is a Shannon diagram. You've got a sender and you send things through a channel and you got a receiver. Channel can be anything from a wire to the Bible being a channel of information from the sender to the receiver. This picture on the far right is a picture from Mars. And for years, people said, hey, look, we've got evidence of aliens. See that face on Mars? But it was a distant picture, and we didn't really know what the original picture looked like, but we do now. So that's what it really is. So there's no information conveyed there. It's just a random structure on Mars. It's not the face of a guy that some alien put there. What about this one? Is this information or is this noise? If you saw that, does that convey any information to you? Yes. Because we've got some yeses and some nos. The ones who think it's information, why do you think it's information?
It indicates that if you don't stop, then somebody else might plow in.
But it's red and yellow. Could that be a bug in the traffic signal?
Well, it could just mean that you slow down.
It could. Well, guess what? In the United States, that's noise. In Europe, it's information because it does mean the light's about to turn red. So it depends on where you're at, whether or not that's information, because if you saw that in the United States, you're going to get confused. You see a red and a yellow. If I saw that, I'm guaranteed I'm going to go through the light. Okay. I actually saw this on my way to Super Bowl 50, that the Broncos won, by the way. And I literally almost missed the game, and you know why? Because I was doing this, and I tripped and I fell. And it took me like an hour to fall. You know, when you're older, you take a long time to fall, and once you lose your balance, and you're trying to gain it, and I was down. And luckily I didn't get hurt, because, you know, when you get older and you fall, it's not a good thing. Is that information or noise? It's information. Okay, a plane went up there and they were promoting Doritos. What about this? Is this information or noise? This is a trick question, by the way. Okay, why is it information? Very good, yep. The choice for the Pope. Some guy did this thing here. They thought it was funny. It kind of is. So no Pope, black smoke, new Pope, white smoke, and then pizzas, you know, need pizza. Okay, now that we have an idea of what information is, how much does information weigh? I can put my PowerPoint on a memory stick. Does my memory stick weigh more because I put that PowerPoint on there?
No.
No. If I erase my memory stick, does it weigh less? No. Information doesn't weigh anything. You can't weigh the number 3, or you can't weigh the symbol for the jump statement in, you know, C++ or whatever. But it's interesting, if you do a Google search for what is the universe composed of, you can go to Britannica, Wikipedia, anywhere. They're going to tell you the universe is made of just matter and energy. That's it. And it's because they've got an atheistic worldview, and they don't, you know, that's all they believe in. Materialism means just material. So they just believe in matter and energy. So if you've got a robot, and this thing is made of matter and energy, will this thing play the piano? If you just have a battery source and you have all the mechanical parts. No, you need information. This thing needs information to play the piano. It needs a computer program to be able to sense what it sees through the lens and then transfer it and play the notes. Information is vital. This guy here was a famous professor of mathematics at MIT. He said information is information, not matter or energy. Because even though he had that kind of secular worldview, he knew that these secularists and atheists were pushing matter and energy only. This guy, John Wheeler, very famous physicist, arguably more as famous as Einstein. He started his career by first saying everything is particles because they discovered that light is both a wave and a particle. I won't get into too much of that science, which let me go back to that. Then he said, second, everything is fields, like electromagnetic fields. Fields are all around us. And then at the end, he's like, everything's information, everywhere you look. And I'm going to give you a quick example in the universe. Here's from Big Think. The basis of the universe may not be energy or matter, but information. Now, I'm going to apologize to my wife ahead of time. Thank you for coming, Sandy. She's like, don't talk about particle entanglement. And now she's got her hand over her eyes. I'm going to briefly talk about it because it talks about information. So in quantum mechanics, from a big picture, this part really isn't super hard to understand. They've discovered that one particle can be in two different places at the same time across the entire span of the universe. Imagine this whole room is the universe, and you can have one particle over there and another particle over there, and light can't travel that fast. Light can only go so far. In the universe, it's going to only travel about that far. So that particle, if you observe it, the other particle will have the opposite spin. Like if you observe it spin this way, the other particle will do the opposite spin. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance, and he denied it to his deathbed because he was a materialist. He denied that part of quantum mechanics. The 3 people who won the Nobel Prize for Physics this last month, they all were able to prove that this is true. Particle entanglement, they further demonstrated this is a phenomenon. They can't explain it, but what can explain it? Information. There's like an equation at work here. And how can it travel the vast distances of space? It can't. It can't travel faster than the speed of light. So that brings into question, general relativity and special relativity that says things can only travel as fast as the speed of light. This disproves that. So that's why you've got scientists saying, you know what, information is really important. Okay, so who remembers Carl Sagan? Some of the older people in this crowd will. He was a secular atheist scientist, and he pushed millions of years and, billions of years old universe. He said this: we humans are the products of a long series of biological accidents. Well, he wrote the script for a movie, and it's real interesting when you actually watch that movie, which I think it was kind of boring overall, but it was a movie called Contact. And what it's about is NASA has this thing, search for extraterrestrial intelligence, these computer programs that are probing space and looking for any kind of signals coming from space that might be evidence for life. So he used that as a theme for his movie, and his scientist in the movie, played by Jodie Foster, she hears this signal from outer space, and she recognizes that this thing isn't just random. And I'm going to play just like a half a minute of this critical part of the movie.
All right, it's restarting. Wait a minute. Those are numbers. That was a 3. The one before it was a 2. Base 10 numbers. Just start counting now. See how far we can get. 1. 7. Those are primes. 2, 3, 5, 7. Those are all prime numbers. And there's no way. It's a natural phenomenon. Okay, let's just calm down.
Did you hear what she said?
The star file on Vega.
There's no way that that's a natural phenomenon. So she, and Carl Sagan, the writer of this, fictional story, recognizes there's information here, so it has to have a information source, an intelligent source. So they think that there's intelligent life out there. And then the movie gets really dumb, and she builds a spaceship, and don't recommend it. Okay, so let's look at information in nature, because there's so many cool examples. I could spend hours on this, and we cover them whenever they show up in the news or in science. We'll cover them on the radio. I really like this one. This is the golden plover. And this bird will migrate from Alaska to Hawaii. It's about 2,500 miles. So imagine in the Pacific, you got Alaska up here, and it's got to go over here to Hawaii. Quite a distance. And scientists calculated that the flight takes 88 hours, 3 days, 4 nights, and they put on an additional 50% weight before they embark. And then they convert 0.6% of that body weight per flight hour into motion and heat. By the way, the most advanced helicopters in the U.S. military, they convert at 10%. So obviously God's design has a much better efficiency. So the question is, at that rate, all the fuel would have burned would have been exhausted 500 miles short of Hawaii. So, but somehow we know the birds get there. But how do they get there? My younger brother's an artist, and he did that one for me. He, maybe they flew on an alien spacecraft. Anybody want to take a guess how they actually do make it to Hawaii? They could actually get, a couple hundred miles farther than Hawaii. What did God program into their intelligence, into their DNA, to allow the birds actually to get past Hawaii? Because based on known physics, they should they should fall short. Perry?
I don't know.
Oh, I thought you raised your hand.
I was stretching.
Oh. Well, the answer is, and you've seen this when you look up in the sky, what are birds doing when they migrate? They'll fly in a V formation. So when they do that, they have a much more efficient energy. And what's interesting is these birds take off, and then they've already left their young behind, so their youngs haven't even hatched. So it's not like they're teaching their young, oh, by the way, when you fly to Hawaii, you got to find a V formation. So they had to have this information already programmed into their brain, where they can now easily make it well past Hawaii. And plus, they know which birds are stronger than the others, and so the ones that are the weakest get to fly towards the back. So they'll take turns too. Okay, symbiosis. Darwin offered this as a test for his theory. If it could be proved that any part of the structure of any one species had been formed for the exclusive good of another species, it would annihilate my theory, for such could not have been produced through natural selection. Tons of examples of symbiosis in nature, and I'll give you just one here. You think of the shark and the cleaner fish. The shark eats a lot of fish, but it doesn't eat this one because it wants its teeth cleaned. So if you believe in evolution, you have to believe in millions of years of this cleaner fish being brave to go, I'm really hungry, I'm going to go clean this shark's teeth and hope he doesn't eat me. But, is that really how evolution proceeds? There's no way, and there's tons of examples in nature of symbiosis. This is fairly new in science, that trees communicate and nourish each other. They call it the wood wide web. Here's what the scientist said, that she discovered that trees send warning signals about environmental change. If you've got like an insect that's attacking a tree, it'll warn other trees. It'll search for kin and transfer their nutrients to neighboring plants before they die. So if you've got a part of a big forest and you've got some trees that need more nutrients, they'll transfer them to them. Maybe that area has a little bit more drought. And that's what they've discovered with trees communicating with each other. That's information. Okay, here's Dr. Lee Spetner. He's got his PhD from MIT in physics. He was an evolutionist for many years, and then he became a creationist. And he said this: in all the reading I've done in the life sciences literature, I've never found a mutation that added information. Because the evolutionists will try to tell you that evolution is mistakes in the DNA plus blind natural selection. Yet when we look for examples of these rare beneficial mutations, we never see them. He says that only such mutations, these mutations must occur, and they must also be probable enough for a long sequence of them to lead to macroevolution. But you can't find any. So Dr. Jerry Bergman, he went through all of the literature doing a search for beneficial hits. He found 400, that's how many hits he found for mutation alone, over 400,000, and only 186 of them were classified as beneficial. And when he examined those 186, they actually resulted in some loss of function. It was loss of information. And I'm going to give you an example of one of those. So I want you to watch this clip real quick, because this guy asks Richard Dawkins, who's like the spokesperson for atheism and evolution. He asked him, can you name an example of a mutation at the genetic level? And here's Dawkins' response. And I want you to know this actually went on for another minute while he's sitting there.
Can you give an example of a genetic mutation or an evolutionary process which can be seen to increase the information in the genome?
If evolution is true, there should be tons of examples. And how does a mistake cause new information anyways? Here's one of the ones they appeal to. There's a trait, a sickle cell trait, that if you have a certain mutation, you're resistant to malaria. So here's what this one website said, and they call this a beneficial mutation. People with just one copy of this gene are 29% less likely to get malaria, while people with 2 copies enjoy a 93% reduction rate. So basically, if you have this mutation, a harmful mutation, you'll be more immune to malaria. You know, my advice is don't let yourself get mutated, move out of the, do whatever you can to avoid the malaria. And they say this gene variant causes at worst a mild anemia, nowhere near as debilitating as sickle cell disease, and that's baloney. I don't know if you guys remember, see here, when the Broncos played the Steelers in a playoff game when Tebow played for the Broncos. This safety for the Steelers has that mutation, and he could not come to high altitude and play that game, or else he's risking his life basically. So he wasn't able to play, and it was interesting that he would have been in the spot where that last overtime play happened, for those of you who love football like myself, and we won that game. That was awesome. So anyways, they appeal to something that causes a disease as evidence for evolution. That's what they're left with. Here's another one. I want to give you these because evolutionists love to use these arguments. And just know that there's tons of evidence out there to deal with these claims that they make. And you can go to Real Science Radio to find them. You can try to contact me if you want to see my slides. I freely share them. So here's the evolutionary story. So in 1975, Japanese researchers found some bacteria living in a pond next to a nylon-producing plant that could digest nylon. But nylon wasn't invented until 1935, so there should be no reason whatsoever for a bacterium to be able to digest nylon before it was invented. Thus, in a mere 40 years, a new gene had evolved, allowing the bacteria to digest something they otherwise could not digest. So they're real excited about this, and they think that's an example of evolution because you got this nylon-eating bacteria. Well, here's what the actual science shows. That the bacteria does not digest nylon, it digests broken down pieces like the part of the components of nylon. Plus, the ability to digest these waste products is incredibly common among all bacteria. So this wasn't some new information that all of a sudden evolved because of some mistakes in the DNA. And John Sanford, who's a leading geneticist at Clemson, he was an evolutionist for many years. He ran the genetics lab at Clemson University, and he became a creationist, I think, about 10 years ago. And he said that our analyses indicate that nylonase genes are abundant, come in many diverse forms, are found in a great number of organisms, and these organisms are found within a great number of natural environments. So it totally refutes their argument of nylon bacteria. Okay, on the same nylon-eating bacteria, they made this claim about gene duplication. I just want to quickly give you arguments against this because you'll hear evolutionists say, oh, the gene can duplicate and then you can get random mistakes in that new duplicated gene, and now you have a way to create new information. So there's numerous problems with that. And so I want to first walk you through that. So here again, the evolutionists are all happy and giddy. They think they have evidence for evolution. But they make one key assumption that the gene duplication is not harmful, it's just a neutral effect. But whenever we look at gene mutations in the DNA, they're always problematic. For example, pancreatic cancer, this is from Science Daily. Gene duplication explains tumor aggressiveness. I've got a whole long list here. If you look at the role of gene duplication, here's their role in cancer. It lists this whole list of types of cancer. I've debated PhD scientists who argue that cancer is evidence of evolution. It's remarkable how desperate they are. Okay, I included this slide just to give you so that you know that a lot of people think that if you duplicate something, like if you have one Bible and you get a second Bible, you've got twice the information. You don't. You just have maybe less chance of error. We built a machine when I worked for McData called the Director, and I was responsible for the 2 main CPU boards, and if one failed, the other one would take over. Well, if you looked at the software, yeah, there's double the amount of software because you've got a totally different PC board, but it's not double the information. The only increase in information when you use Shannon logic is the amount of switching logic that you have so that you can control the switch over between the 2 components. I won't get into the technical aspects of that. If you think of RAID, if anybody knows what RAID is, it's redundant disks, so you have protection. If you have one hard drive and you don't want to lose all your data on it, you have another hard drive and maybe it replicates it, or you can have a whole bunch of hard drives. And we do this where I work at Micron Technology. We do RAID technology. But it's not double, triple, quadruple the information. It's a way to protect data, and actually the information pretty much is contained to what you've put on your disk. It's not double the information. Okay, this one's pretty cool. And I love using this as an apologetics argument, and it's one that you could probably use and just know that the science backs it up. So the DNA they've discovered, when you read the DNA, it produces proteins. It's like a programming language. You're going through memory like a programming language does, and you're executing instructions. In this case, the DNA is building a protein. But they've discovered the DNA also gets read the other way and does a whole nother set of instructions for things like, how much protein to produce. So the argument you could use is someone tells you, they're an atheist. One of my favorites, because I'm an engineer, is can you write a book that tells a story and then have that book where it's read backwards and it tells a different story? That would be incredible, right? Well, God has done that with DNA.
Amen.
It's amazing. Bill Gates said that DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software we've ever created. You can take the information that's in a DNA on the head of a pin, and that's equivalent to all the information that's out there on the entire internet. That comes from Microsoft, not Fred Williams at a conference teaching about creation. It's remarkable. So here's where the report was. The scientists discovered double meaning in genetic code that I was just talking about, second code hidden within the DNA. I want to give an example. Let's say you've got, the DNA says, build antibody to fight infection. So you get an infection in your body and the DNA says, we got to react to that. So reads along the DNA, the RNA forms a protein. And then the other side of it says, when you read it the other direction, add more when it's cold outside. So what this scientist said in that paper that I referenced is, the problem is if you have a mutation, some random mutation that happens along there, you're not affecting just one way that the DNA is being read, you're also affecting the other way. So you're breaking two things at the same time. And he's like, man, how can this happen? And by the way, if you look at the quality control system that God had programmed into our DNA, it's remarkable, the amount of work that goes on, the engineering ingenuity in preventing it from happening. But because we're fallen, there are the occasional mutations that occur from neutrinos coming from space. There's radiation. There's different things that cause that now slowly over time. So let's say you mutate one section there, and now you have these instructions: build antibody to fight infection and add it messes both up. So he said this: the fact that the genetic code can simultaneously write two kinds of information means that many DNA changes that appear to alter protein sequences may actually cause disease by disrupting gene control programs or even both mechanisms simultaneously. So there's mutation. There's no way you can get evolution by mutation. And in fact, they've found that the DNA encodes 12 different ways, not just front and back, like 3D diagonally, 12 different directions you get program codes. It's mind-boggling. This guy is another evolutionist who became a creationist, and he's a famous scientist, actually, from Brazil. He was a founder of the Thomas Mass Spectrometry Laboratory, and he's a member of the National Academy of Sciences in Brazil. As a biochemist, I became skeptical about Darwinism when I was confronted with the extreme intricacy of the genetic code and its many most intelligent strategies to code, decode, and protect its information. When you look at the DNA and what happens in genetics, how could you possibly believe in evolution? How could you not recognize that there's an information giver, someone who programmed and created that? Here's another one. This picture has creationists terrified from Mother Jones, a typical liberal magazine. So I want to talk about this one because you'll hear about this. And again, the evolutionists are real happy. They think they've got another one that helps their argument. But I want to get the fake science alert out there, because once I saw what they were talking about, they've been making this argument for a long time, and it's totally been disproven completely by genetics and by the sequencing we've done. with the Genome Project. So the claim was this: all great apes have 24 pairs of chromosomes, 2 of them fused together in the past to arrive at 23 pairs in humans. So they say we're related to chimps, apes, we have a common ancestor. They've got 24 chromosomes, so somehow we got to explain how we got it down to 23. So what their evidence is, they look at chromosome 2 and they go, ha, there's near identical sequences, and they've got leftover parts of the center and leftover parts of the ends, and I'm going to show a picture of that to kind of help explain it. So imagine that here's the ape ancestor and it fused into one. So what they're saying is that, we found evidence of these things that look like centromeres on this one chromosome in 2 different spots. We found evidence of this center telomere. But when you actually look at it, now that we've sequenced the full DNA, by the way, when they gave this evidence, they were cherry picking what they were looking at. They didn't have the full genome. So they were using extracted information, is the best way I can put it. Now that we've fully sequenced this in both chimps and humans, this is what is actually located in that spot, a fully functional binding switch. There's no way that that's evidence that that's a fused chromosome from a chimp ancestor. They claim that that was useless telomere. It's not at all. When we looked at it, it doesn't have any signature of a telomere. It's a fully functional gene. Totally refuted their argument. So Dr. Tompkins, he said this: the functional genes do not arise by the mythical fusing of telomeres. The alleged fusion site is not a degenerate fusion sequence, but is, and since creation, has been a functional feature of a very important gene that they've discovered. Dr. Tom Snyder is a PhD in information science at CU, and he since now works for NIH, and him and I corresponded quite a bit several years ago. He's an information science expert, but he's an atheist and a Marxist. But I actually used him a lot because he recognized that you can't get information by random noise and whatnot, because you'll get evolutionists claim that, and even creationists will say that and says, well, that's why we can't use Shannon information. Well, anyways, he's an expert on binding sites, and I've been wanting to get a hold of him because we lost touch with each other probably about 10 years ago. But scientists discovered that it would take 100 million years to change a binding site. I mean, that's how rigid it is. Okay, here's another one. And again, they're gleeful because they think, mistakes that argue for evolution, and here's that argument. And this is from a guy named Kenneth Miller, secular evolutionist. He gave this analogy. He said, I ran your papers through a program that looks for unusual matching strings. You guys misspelled the same 6 words in the same 6 ways. And when you have the matching mistakes, there's no other explanation other than a common ancestor for the paper. Now, professors will use software. My sister was a professor in journalism, and so she would use this software to try to see if her students had plagiarized a source. And Dana, I don't know if you do the same thing, just to make sure he's nodding yes. So, professors will do this because kids, they'll cheat, they'll plagiarize someone else's work or share the work, and this is one way to find out. If you see shared mistakes in the same paper, that's a pretty good clue. So they tried to make this argument with evolution. They did for many years, but this one has also been refuted. So the argument goes like this. You've got a broken pseudogene. A pseudogene supposedly doesn't do anything anymore. It's broken. It doesn't code for anything. So if that transfers to a chimp in the future chimp and a future human, and it has the same mistake, then he's saying, that proves evolution. They've got a shared mistake. But the assumption is that pseudogene is broken. What if that pseudogene isn't broken? Their entire argument goes away. And so that's, if you've heard of junk DNA, they've found out that there's really there's no junk DNA. That's been disproven again by the Genome Project. And so our pseudogenes, here's from this is a government organization from PubMed in the NCBI. Pseudogenes, are they junk or functional DNA? They found that pseudogenes have been suitably investigated, often exhibit functional roles. End of the evolutionist argument, period. It's gone. Okay, if you think about, again, they think you have to have mutations for evolution for us to go from a bird to a dinosaur to a man. So how are you going to get a harmful mutation and have the natural selection even notice it? So I gave this example, it's a little old. The impact of a beneficial mutation on the genome is akin to taking a $10 bill from Nolan Oriano's $260 million contract. He wouldn't notice, no one would notice. So, and if you think of humans, since Adam and Eve, every generation since, we're taking on more and more mutations. And we've got really good scientific evidence of why after the flood, you'd even be taking on more, because radioactivity was greatly increased by the flood. And that's a whole nother scientific talk that I find completely fascinating, but I know that I'm not going to, dovetail off on that and bore the tears out of everybody. But radioactivity, you only find it in the Earth's crust, and there's a reason for that. And Dr. Walt Brown, PhD from MIT, explains that. Well, radiation is harmful, right? So since the flood, we're even mutating even more. Every generation we get slightly worse. So the point is, how does natural selection can only pick individuals. It can't pick specific mutations in the genes. It can only pick an entire individual. If you had a beneficial mutation, how would it even be noticeable? It would be buried in the noise. And then the math for evolution never worked. There's a guy, Dr. James Crow, I sent him some math on this years ago, and he's since passed away. But he agreed that genetics doesn't support evolution. I'm like, well, you're a geneticist and you write for the Science magazine and Nature magazine. Why do you believe in evolution? He goes, oh, because it's proven in astronomy and other things. He could not defend it with his own discipline. And so what the math showed, that if you had a mutation rate of 9 per person, basically you'd have to have 16,000 offspring. Each breeding pair have to have 16,000 offspring for evolution to even start, to get going. And so we know that's not possible. Here's what an evolutionist said. Just so you know that I'm not making this stuff up. He said this, he argued that if most of the human genome is functional, each human female needed to make 10 to the 35th power children to prevent human genomic degeneration. He concluded that therefore the human genome must be about 90% junk. But that's totally been disproven. We know that the DNA, as we've investigated it, they're finding functionality throughout the entire genome. It's no longer, scientists can't make the claim of junk DNA anymore. It's loaded with information. So there is a group of secular scientists that are trying to come up with a different idea, and they've signed a thing called scientific dissent from Darwinism. We are skeptical of the claims for the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. Careful examination of the evidence for Darwinian theory should be encouraged. Because you don't get this in the colleges, you don't get this in the high schools. They start with Dr. Seuss books all the way through college, indoctrinating kids with millions of years in evolution. They don't see this evidence. That's why we believe shows like ours, Real Science Radio, is important to get this kind of information out there. What about predictions? Evolution has made predictions, but they cannot. That's what Bill Nye said, but that's totally not true. When they've made predictions, they've been wrong. This famous evolutionist said that he predicted in 1949 that evolution could never produce various mechanisms such as the wheel and magnet, which would be useless till fairly perfect. So, could not create a mechanism like a wheel or a magnet. Well, guess what we found like in a grasshopper? Look at those gears. Does that look like something that would happen by random mutations and selection over time? Those are actual gears in a grasshopper. And there's different creatures that have a motor and a stator, just like in the design. This is one of my favorites. If anyone know how the heart of the giraffe works? So the heart weighs over 24 pounds and it pumps 16 gallons a minute. And if you know fluid mechanics, anybody here, the pressure to get liquid up against gravity is exponential as you go up. So how would you design for something like this? Well, the neck in the giraffe has one-way backflow preventer valves to regulate the flow of blood to the head. Well, why? Because what happens when that huge amount of pressure is going up, pumping from the heart, so up to the giraffe's head, if he puts his head down and you're pumping at that same rate, I mean, that would not be good. That's my brother's graphic art again. And blood vessels in the giraffe's head are very elastic, and the blood vessels near the feet are thicker and much less elastic. So God designed this perfectly. There's no way you can explain this with evolution. Do you see a bunch of exploded head giraffes in the fossil record? No, they appear suddenly. Okay, what about the eyeball? And here's what Darwin said. To suppose that the eye, with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection, seems, I fairly confess, absurd to the highest degree. We agree. So evolutionists, here's what's really interesting. The eye, as complex as it is, they believe that the eye evolved down 40 different independent paths of evolution. Why do they say that? Well, for example, the octopus has an eyeball very similar to humans. Yet we're not supposed to be related to octopuses. So they say, well, that eyeball evolved on its own separate path. How does that happen? I mean, what are the odds of that? Well, here's something that on our radio show, when we debated a certain evolutionist, and we've had some pretty big name evolutionists on our show. Here's P.Z. Myers. This was the Trocula challenge. And look at this little slit right here that holds the eyeball in place. Now, where were the mutations that allowed this whole thing to happen? And not only that, it's the same exact design on the other side of the, with the other eyeball. It's impossible to explain that with evolution. You can't do it. And I wanted to show this last one, and we're getting close to wrapping up. So this is a device we developed for Caterpillar when I worked for Trimble. And as you all know, whenever you use your cell phone or your laptop, you have to have when you connect to Wi-Fi, you got to get somebody's Wi-Fi password. So there's little signals, little passwords and whatnot in order to connect. So, and in software, we have a thing called a mutex. I'll just quickly go through that. You may have different processes that need to share the same object. And so you got to block the other two when you're accessing it. If you don't do that, if you don't use mutexes properly, you can corrupt memory. Why am I talking about that? Well, consider fertilization. Polyspermy is extremely dangerous. And what polyspermy is if two sperm impregnate a cell at the same time, an ovum, that if you have polyspermy, they both get in, it's extremely deadly. I mean, that will be a miscarriage. It will not survive. You cannot have two sperm doing that. And so if you look at how God designed this, is as soon as it happens, as soon as you get one of the sperm and the ovum to fuse, rapidly it shuts everybody else out. So that's similar to a mutex in software. And it's very quick. They've studied this, and they've got this fast block, and it's electrical. There's an electrical process that does this. So as soon as impregnation occurs, within 1 to 3 seconds, there's this electrical fast charge block, and then behind that, there's a mechanical slow block that lasts about a minute that removes any remaining sperm that are in the vicinity of impregnating the ovum. It's simply remarkable. And so here's what this scientist says, and it just talks of the incredible complexity in the design, the information done by the creator. On cue, at the time of fertilization, we see the egg release thousands of packages, each dumping 1 million zinc atoms, and then it's quiet. Then there's another burst of zinc release. Each egg has 4 or 5 of these periodic sparks. It is beautiful to see, orchestrated much like a symphony. So where did the programming come for that? So I want to show you an experiment they did. So when I start this, you'll see they're looking for this zinc spark in mice ovum. And when you see a spark, you'll see that at that time it got impregnated. It's really cool. I'm going to start it right now. And you'll see occasionally a spark on a certain egg. And then they know at that point, the zinc spark, boom, that thing's been impregnated. Just remarkable. They did that with the human egg. And so this is the moment of conception when this happens. And look how rapidly that occurs. And it will prevent polyspermy. So once that happens, everything else is blocked out. It's kind of the spark of life, and the science proves that life begins at conception without a doubt. It's a totally different person, completely. Okay. One last thing I want to show you that's super cool. If you think of octopuses, and I'm going to show you a clip on that, the programming required to do this, and at first, it's remarkable. I'm just going to start it.
You're going to see a nice coral bottom. And you see that an octopus would stand out very easily there if you couldn't use your camouflage, use your skin to change color and texture. Here's some algae in the foreground and an octopus. Isn't that amazing? Now Roger spooked him, so as he took off, a cloud of ink lands, and when he lands, the octopus says, "Okay, I've been seeing best thing to do is get as big as I can get." That big brown makes his eye spot very big. So he's bluffing. Let's do it backwards. I thought he was joking when he first showed it to me. I thought it was all graphics. So here it is in reverse. Watch the skin color. Watch the skin texture. Just an amazing animal. Can change color and texture to match the surroundings. Watch him blend right into this algae. 1, 2, 3. And now he's gone, and so am I.
Isn't God cool? That is just so awesome. You know, I've got a saltwater aquarium, and I bought this thing called a foxfish. And my wife was even amazed. I'm like, look at that thing. It actually had swam up into this ornament that had since been, you know, it's got algae on it, kind of dirty looking. And I thought the fish was dead. So I put my net in there, and then all of a sudden it took off. Well, it changed colors from a yellow-black. It's kind of a yellow with some black accents on it. When it hides in that thing, it takes the same color of that ornament. I thought the thing was dead because it was a different color. It was like brown and ugly. And so that was super cool. I told that to the guy at the fish store. I was like, I didn't know foxfish did that. You know, where is the information, the programming for that? How did that evolve? There's just no way. It's not possible. Okay, so God's evidence for creation. If you look at a building, everybody can look at a building and know that it had a builder. And so, you know, Paul said that for every house is built by someone, but he who builds all things is God. Hebrews 3:4. And what does Romans 1 say? For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, just like I showed you with the octopus and the symbiosis and all the DNA, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So, unfortunately for those who deny God to their grave, they won't have an excuse. They won't be able to say, oh man, you know, I was taught evolution in millions of years and, you know, mutations cause this. God does provide everybody with the evidence in his creation. That's his argument for creation, is his creation. The evidence is of his invisible attributes are clearly seen by the things that are made. It's just overwhelming, and how you can look at another person and just the consciousness of a person, all the different things, and look at that. How can Einstein look at spooky action at a distance and deny the science behind that? Because it argues for invisible attributes that are clearly seen. So faith, from the Webster's Dictionary, belief and trust in and loyalty to God, okay, belief in the traditional doctrines of religion, or firm belief in something for which there is no proof. Because the world will try to make fun of you. Oh, you can have your faith. And they're saying that in a condescending way that, oh, faith is blind. You know, it's really, they're the ones with the blind faith to believe in, you know, evolution. But that's not really how the Bible defined faith. So if you look at Hebrews 11:1, faith is the substance of things hoped for, okay, but it's also the evidence of things not seen. And Hebrews 11:6, it's impossible to please God without faith. And then it says right after that, you have to first believe that he exists. And so that's how we want to try to reach the unbelieving world, you know, and the ex-Jehovah's Witnesses that have been embraced by atheists, that the evidence there is so undeniable. And just the evidence is clearly seen by the things that God made. And if you believe in God, you know, it's impossible to please God if you don't believe that he exists. And he's given us tons of evidence. So John the Baptist has sent us to you saying, are you the coming one, or do we look for another? So, you know, John the Baptist was having doubts in prison. And it's John the Baptist. He met Jesus. You know, he saw, heard God speak. Even he had some doubts. So how did Jesus answer him? Did he say, ye of little faith? This is how Jesus answered that question. Jesus answered, said to them, go and tell John the things you have seen and heard, that the blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised. This is all evidence for his existence. I mean, there's a really cool video on the book of John that some producer made, and I don't know if it's Hollywood, probably not, but it takes the book of John as the actual script and goes and presents that as a picture, as a motion picture, and it just follows the scripture to a T through the whole movie, the book of John. And it's amazing if you watch that, it becomes even more clear how Jesus is like, come on, I just did these miraculous things and you still don't believe. I'm presenting you with overwhelming evidence. And even if I was to raise someone from the dead, you still wouldn't believe if you think of the Lazarus story. So anyways, Jesus provided us with overwhelming evidence for his existence. So that's it for how information really points the arrow directly at God, the information giver of all life. Thank you everyone very much.
That's fantastic. I think everybody would agree that was amazing, Fred.
Thank you.
That was just incredible. Can you give us a brief statement on the new telescope that has gone up into space?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Just something, just get everybody up to speed real quick with what that was all about.
The Hubble telescope, and Perry made a prediction, which we mentioned on air, and it was awesome about, when we get the images back from the Hubble telescope, are they going to show a young universe or an old universe? And I'm paraphrasing how you said it.
James Webb.
Yeah, the James Webb telescope. So now that we're starting to get these images back, and we've seen some of these before, but this is just validating the evidence. They're seeing, when they look back in this thing, they're supposed to see the beginning of the universe, the start of the Big Bang. So if the Big Bang happened, you'd have, galaxies forming and starting to get their spiral arms over time. But when you look back at when the Big Bang began, they did not expect to find fully formed galaxies. So there's a picture in one of the science journals of these codgers, these old guys in the nursery of the Big Bang. So you got these codger galaxies at the start of the Big Bang. Why are fully formed galaxies already there? And when you read the reports from NASA, and scientists are like, oh, this is amazing. We're shocked. It's unbelievable. We don't understand it. It's confusing. They use all these non-scientific terms. And that's the thing about evolutionists. So often when they see things that refute their whole argument, like these galaxies that are already fully formed, they say they're shocked. One example, when they looked at the human chromosome, the Y chromosome and the chimp chromosome, that chromosome isn't supposed to change much. It's very robust. So when they finally sequenced both, evolutionists were expecting to find lots of differences in them, very few differences, because they're supposed to be hard to mutate. So the human and the Y chromosome should be real similar. Well, it turns out they were 30 to 47% different. What did the evolutionist scientists say who did the study and the report? He said, that's horrendous. Is horrendous a scientific term, or is it a religious term? He was mad because, God, maybe God does exist, because the chimp and the human are not related and evolution isn't true. So the Hubble telescope was just James Webb telescope was another example of how evolutionists were shocked at what they discovered. So much evidence.
And that's recent. That's just in the last few months.
And we're still getting new images from the James Webb telescope. So pretty cool stuff.
So one more time, the website is rsr.org, Real Science Radio. So we've heard a lot of apologetic things here today from Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, and now we're talking about secularism. So you can't always find a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon, but you can find secularists everywhere. So go to Real Science Radio. It is, I think, the internet's biggest repository of peer-reviewed science papers that disprove most of the secularist claims. It's just a treasure trove of information. It's huge. And we want to give a shout out to Bob, the founder of that ministry, and your partner. He was here last year, and sadly he passed away as soon as he went back. home. He was gone within just a few weeks of that event last year from COVID. So we want to keep his family in our prayers, the Enyart family. And again, Fred, just thank you so much for coming.
Yep, thank you. And I have business cards that I'll provide, just so you can remember the website name and whatnot, and just go there and you can reach me. There's contact information on that card if you want any other slides today or just questions. There's so much cool stuff out there. Find out why the moon is pockmarked on one side, and you'll find out that all the asteroids and meteors that you see coming back to Earth, they all originated from Earth. A lot of evidence for that. They find an Earth rock on the moon. I'm sorry, I could keep going on this stuff for hours.